What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and welcome to the finale for this year's Week of Madness. It's been a crazy couple of weeks getting ready and releasing so many videos in such a short time, but I'd say that it was definitely worth it in the end. This is something special for the channel, and I don't plan on ever letting it go by the wayside. Anyways, you can probably recall that we finished the Borderlands Let's Play this past Tuesday, which means that it's time to give it an official review. I'd like to note that I usually do a review for an entire franchise of games together, but Borderlands is a special case. The first game is so different from either Borderlands 2 or the pre-sequel, so it gets its own review as a result. Again, this review is just for the first game, and not any of the other installments in the Borderlands franchise. With all of that out of the way, pull up a chair and get comfortable as we dive into this review with Borderlands. For those of you who don't know for some reason, Borderlands is an FPSRPG that was developed by Gearbox Software and published by 2K Games back in late 2009. Odds are that you've probably heard of Borderlands 2, since that game is universally acclaimed pretty much everywhere. If nothing else, you've definitely seen the pose of holding your hand up to your head in the shape of a gun. I doubt Borderlands invented this pose, but they most certainly helped make it a popular reference. Admittedly, my first introduction into the world of Pandora was through Borderlands 2, but I'll try my best to judge this game without comparing it to a successor too much. I fell in love with the humor and adventure in the second game, so I began to allow my curiosity to drift towards the first game in this franchise. I'd heard that it had more RPG elements than Borderlands 2, which was one of my bigger complaints about 2 at the time, so it had me there. Like most of the games I own on Steam, I waited for Borderlands to go on sale. I started up the game just about as fast as it would download and made a character for myself off of my favorite NPC from Borderlands 2, Mordecai, and started my venture into the pre-Handsome Jack Pandora. A few things stood out to me from the very beginning. The color palette was mostly gray and tan, the menu systems were horrible to navigate, and there was a lack of set-in-stone main villain for the first few leveling zones, but I'll get to that. As I progressed further through the game, many of its problems and strengths became more and more prevalent. After the initial battle to stabilize Firestone from the bandits, the arid Badlands can become a very vast and open place to go about questing. It can almost feel daunting with how much space you're supposed to traverse all by yourself, with only a few friendly NPCs to help you out along the way. That's something that not a lot of FPS or RPGs did at the time. Give you an open world to just roam around and find out what there was to do by yourself. Most RPGs out then would give you a very linear experience, telling you exactly what you could and couldn't do at any given time, like Trine. Other FPS games like Call of Duty were focusing mostly on online multiplayer with things like team deathmatch and domination. Borderlands did allow for online multiplayer, but it only allowed up to 4 players to play together at once, and they'd be playing as a team instead of fighting each other. One of the first major things that became apparent to me through the first few hours was that the game was relatively bland in more aspects than one. The obvious bit to mention here would be the color palette, and I understand that Pandora is supposed to be a barren wasteland, but still. Everywhere you look, gray, some brown, and more gray. With the exotic beasts and crazed bandits to fight, you'd hope that there would be a bit more color painted around than the occasional blood splatter. The introduction to questing was pretty stale as well. Every other quest would have you run to some far-off subzone, run all the way back to turn it in, only to have you return to the area you just came from. There are much better ways to have players run a marathon than sending them on wild goose chases. The more effective way to design these quests would be to give the player all the quests for an area at once and allow for simultaneous completion. I get that some differentiation is required from trash to boss quests, but either allow for quests to be completed midway through zones or create more zones, because running back and forth like a chicken with his head cut off gets real old really fast. The Firestone quests have a tendency to drag on and on with no end in sight, and don't do a really good job of introducing the variety of enemies the game has later on. The only things you really face are skags and bandits, not even seeing the Crimson Lands until well into the latter half of the campaign. I'm sure that you've already heard plenty about this during the Let's Play, and don't even get me started on Commander Steel and Angel. Humor is something that I almost abstain from mentioning when talking about the blandness of Borderlands, since I really see what the writers were trying to go for. It's just not funny. If you'll allow me to reference the sequel ever so briefly, I can see the beginnings of future brilliance, but the dialogue just isn't quite there yet. Performances come off as apathetic and eccentric for something that I'm assuming was supposed to be zany. What is consistently funny is some of the wackiness that the gameplay has to offer. Some of my favorite memories from Borderlands are the vehicular combat, running over enemies that would have normally taken minutes to kill. The physics engine is also quite the gag sometimes, as I'm sure you're already well aware. I can absolutely see these things as an argument for the game not being well developed, but these quirks actually made the game more enjoyable in my opinion. One of the biggest things for me is how a game feels while playing it. Is it responsive? Are gameplay methods reliable? How is the difficulty scaling? Borderlands definitely falls on the wrong side of the fence in this discussion. The game can feel clunky at times, and it's entirely possible for enemies to stun lock you from lucky shots messing up your aim. In the meantime, it's all but impossible to do the same to them, which doesn't seem fair if you ask me. As you saw in the Let's Play, I played as Mordecai, and my main weapon of choice was often a sniper rifle. I probably explained this in one of the first few episodes, but I chose Mordecai because of my beef with how inconsistent the aiming was during my first playthrough with Brick. I figured that if any character was going to have a good chance at actually hitting whatever I'm aiming at, it's going to be the guy who has an entire skill tree for sniping. I was wrong. wrong. Now, I will absolutely admit that I suck at first-person shooters, and my aim normally sucks, but I'm not that bad. It's reasonable to believe that your shots with a sniper rifle are going to land on or near the center of your scope, and expecting anyone to hit anything when the bullets actually hit anywhere in your circle of vision is ridiculous. I would aim for my enemy's head and hit their gut, aim above their shoulder and hit their head, and aim above their shoulder in the exact same spot as before, and miss. That's the real beef I have with the gunplay for Borderlands, that nothing is consistent. If you're going to add ballistics, that's fine, but at least make the results predictable. To add insult to injury, loot drops weren't quite as often as they should have been. Weapon drops were usually plenty, but there wasn't ever anything noteworthy. I can't say that anything short of a large chest or a mini-boss ever gave me a gun that didn't totally suck. Having to buy ammo from the machine because I'm genuinely out after being mindful of not wasting my shots is just unacceptable. Borderlands isn't trying to pass itself off as the kind of game where you have limited amounts of resources. Quite the opposite. In a game that takes the loot grind mechanic from RPGs, it's kind of necessary to actually provide players with usable loot. Fortunately, the loot issue partially clears up once you get to New Haven, though the problem never fully dissipates. Something that does somewhat make up for the flaw is the variety of weapons that you have to choose from. Of course, you have the traditional sniper rifle, assault rifle, and shotgun, but there's also two different kinds of pistols, SMGs, rocket launchers, and these weird alien weapons you get access to towards the end of your first playthrough. Depending on your playstyle, any one of these types of weapons could be absolutely incredible for you. Personally, I found that the SMGs had really good accuracy, damage, and fire rate, so you can imagine what I fought with when in close quarters. Though that's not to say that I never used anything else. When the game actually did give me something really good, I would rock that rare weapon until it wasn't overpowered. That's one of the bonuses to having a decent variety of weapons, that you might just get something that's good despite it not being your first choice. The last little bit I'd like to cover is less about the gameplay and more about the optimization and menus. In all honesty, Borderlands has not aged well. You can really tell that it came out in 2009, and that Gearbox was probably focusing on the console version first and foremost. The highly stylized design allows for the graphics to remain passable, but that doesn't do much for the invisible walls and various other glitches present. I'm not talking about the glitches that could be considered exploits for the player's benefit, but the ones that prevent you from having any fun one way or another. Stuff like enemies aggroing from halfway across the map, or having bosses despawn, forcing you to restart the game to fix it. These kind of things can be utterly soul-crushing if you're just getting into your groove, and I doubt that these bugs are going to be fixed now if they haven't been already. Menus are something of a plague for this game. They're also clunky and useless. I mean, do you really need to ask me if I'm sure I want to buy ammo for my gun? What's the point of having the vendor tell you when your ammo's already full if you're going to ask every single time? The same goes for selling items when there's a rebuy tab in the shops. It's just time-consuming and unnecessary. Borderlands is an interesting example of a concept that greatly expanded on the original idea when the time came for improvements. I'm really glad that later installments of this franchise were able to make such drastic changes to how the games feel, and I'm glad that I'll have to do a separate review when the time comes to talk about the rest of the Borderlands games, even if it means more work in the long run. It's these reasons that I find myself giving Borderlands an 8.1 out of 10. The game honestly hasn't aged well, and there's honestly better options for titles to try out if you're looking for something similar to fill that FPSRPG gap in your life. Borderlands 2, for example. I can't recommend this game to anyone but the most hardcore Borderlands fans out there who really want to see where this whole thing began. For those of you who aren't quite as dedicated, I'd suggest skipping this one in favor of the sequel and the pre-sequel. If I haven't been able to sway you thus far, then it's worth mentioning that Borderlands is currently available on Steam for $19.99, or you can pick up the Game of the Year edition for $29.99, and this one just might be worth it for those of you who are going to get the game anyways. I like to keep DLC and mods out of the official review discussion, but Borderlands has some really good DLC if you're into good storytelling, though the problems with the gameplay are still present, so you've been warned. Anyways, that wraps up another official review of episode, as well as the Week of Madness for 2016. I'll admit that I was a little worried about getting all the videos out on time, but all the hard work leading up to this week has absolutely been worth it. In terms of the Borderlands 2 Let's Play, where Sir John Mack and I plan on doing a double Psycho run, we're going to hold off on that until the Tomb Raider 2013 Let's Play finishes up. A few months ago, I officially moved my channel away from revolving around Let's Plays and focused more on other projects. I still like doing Let's Plays, but more for fun than for actual content that I can be proud of, which is why I'm only going to be doing one Let's Play at a time for the foreseeable future. This will hopefully allow for more episodes of any given Let's Play to come out a bit more frequently than they already do, not having to rotate between multiple. For those of you who've been around this channel long enough to remember the Ion Let's Play, don't worry, that will be returning once the Borderlands 2 Let's Play finishes up. I have no idea as to when that time will actually come, but it'll happen eventually. I think I've been rambling on enough for one video, so if you enjoyed this review of Borderlands, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more like it, maybe even subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Links for my social media and whatnot are in the description below, and as for the comment question, when do you think the Ion Let's Play will return? It's more of a random guess, but it was late when I wrote this script, and I really didn't want to think anymore. Anyways, that's the time I've got for today, so until next time, don't die.